freight efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends.
Here in episode 93, we're joined by Bruce Stockton, Chief Operating Officer of Wilson Logistics and a NACFE founder, where we talk about what drew him to trucking and his years at CFI and Conway. He also talks about the value of networking, the importance of data in driving decision-making, and making sure technology decisions have a good ROI. Finally, he shares his thoughts on the upcoming 2027 emissions regulations and on electric trucks. Today we have joining us Bruce Stockton. Bruce is Chief Operating Officer at Wilson Logistics, and he's an NACFE founder. We'll get into that here in a little bit. Bruce, I'm thrilled to have you on today, but honestly, I'm a little bit nervous. You've got some stories on me that I'm not sure I really want to have out in the public, but I got a couple on you too, so be careful, Bruce.
We'll call a truce and be neutral today. How about that?
Well, we still want to have some punch in this, so I think we'll do that. We go way back, and I know that we've worked closely together on different things over the years. We titled this podcast series "Freight Efficiency" with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends, and yeah, I think it's about 15 years. Do you remember how we met and became friends, Bruce? I always ask everyone on the show.
You know, I think it was after there was an event in Colorado that you were at that I was not, and then there was an event in Chicago not long after that, a few weeks, and I think it was the Chicago event, and you were still with Navistar, and I know I was still with Conway Truckload, which was previously CFI. And I think it was in Chicago, and I think Don Baldwin with Michelin sort of made the introduction.
Yeah, Bruce, that's exactly right. Well, it's not exactly right. It's mostly right. Yeah, it was in November in Chicago, and that was the what we called the inaugural meeting of NACFE. We were being optimistic calling it the inaugural meeting, like there was going to be more. We weren't sure at the time, but here we are 15 years later. And yeah, Don Baldwin, he did introduce us. And you were doing a lot of work at Conway at the time on efficiency. We'll get into that in a minute. I was kind of thinking that that had probably mostly to do with prices of fuel going up. But I got to credit you with one thing publicly is when we were after that meeting, I think it was in February at TMC, a bunch of us were saying, all right, well, this NACFE, it makes some sense to help have an organization that's navigating these things for the industry, but we didn't have anybody to run it. And you pretty much just said, well, hey, there's one guy here that doesn't have a job. That's Roth. He should run this thing. So I'm going to give some credit or blame to you for all that. You remember that?
I do remember that. And Baldwin from Michelin he and I, we actually conspired on that before we even mentioned your name. And to your credit, I mean, it has come a long way and offered a lot of value to fleets and even shippers and receivers that pay attention today to, you know, the sustainability efforts that really make a difference.
Tell us about your career. And I always like to put in context what we're going to talk about, but you know, what drew you to trucking, and you know, all the way up to the role and the work that you're doing now?
In the very early 80s, graduating high school, went to college with the intention of getting a degree, but not really knowing what industry or segment that I would end up in. Probably like most people that age, you really don't know what you want to do or what excites you. But I remember vehicles and anything with, my wife says anything with wheels gets me excited. And so when I was in college, I drove a school bus. It was a great part-time job because the schedule fit around the college schedule, summers and all. And my last semester of college, I remember driving through Joplin, Missouri, where I still live, and trucking was pretty prevalent in Joplin and still is. And there was a company called Monchem that a guy by the name of Larry Kleppel had founded years ago. And I remember driving by there and seeing a lot of chrome and polished stainless steel, and the sun would reflect off these trucks. And for some reason, my subliminal told me there must be some money over there. And I just pulled in there one day and went in the wrong door, the back door instead of the front door. And I met Larry Kleppel. He was there at lunchtime, and he owned the place. And I think they were close to 500 trucks. And he was working the driver counter. And he asked if he could help me. And I said, well, I'm looking for work. And he said, you mean a job? And I said, no, just work. And he took me back to his office and sort of a informal interview and said, when can you start? And I said, well, I'm working driving a school bus twice a day. I've got night classes. And he said, what are you doing on the weekends? And I said, well, nothing. He said, I'll see you tomorrow. This was a Friday. He said, I'll see you tomorrow morning. And my intention on that Friday afternoon was to drive to Kansas City and visit my parents. So I called him and said, I'm not going to be there. I've taken a job. And I went to work for Larry at Monchem as a safety associate. And basically I was dealing with drivers that would come to the counter. And, you know, these are the days in 1984, 83, late 83, 84, where you didn't have electronic logs. Everything was paper. Receipts were all paper. You didn't have pre-pass, toll passes. And drivers would come in with a stack of receipts and want reimbursed, and it had to match their logs, and it was very manual process. And so that's how I got started. And then after college, CFI had a management trainee program that they had advertised while I was still working for Larry. And I interviewed for that and was hired. And they said, you're going to be on the truck for a while. I didn't know a while was going to be a couple of years, but that was okay. And that was long before telematics. It was long before anybody really worried about fuel mileage on a truck or how to progressive shift in a truck. Automated transmissions weren't even thought of unless it was in some kind of a vocational application. And that's how I started. And they put me with a...
So you drove for 2 years.
Right. Yeah.
And wasn't Conway mostly, I was over the road. So you were out a couple weeks at the time. Is that right?
2 to 3 weeks, and you'd be home you basically got a day off for every week that you were out. And I was newly married. I got married, and Ann and I were married in August of 84. Just celebrated our 40th anniversary just this last weekend. And so, that was a bit of a struggle, but it's worked, and just this industry and career always required a good percentage of travel, but it's probably one of the reasons we're still married today.
Yeah, and so a long career at CFI, and then after that, I would say you've kind of done a number of things, including help NACFE for projects, do some work with Michelin. Now you're back with a fleet. So I think you're trying to spread your, the experiences and skills and stuff you learned later in your career here across multiple companies. Was that intentional, Bruce, or how? What would you say about the last, say, 8 or 10 years of your career?
So I think the last 10 years, when I left Conway in 2011, I was just ready to take the next step, and I had never really been out on my own. So I took a leap of faith and started my own consulting business. And I had people approach me about doing work for them, and people would call me even when I was with CFI Conway and network. I mean, every conference that I was fortunate to be able to go to, the value in those conferences was more the networking of the people than it was maybe a formal presentation or training session. And so I developed a lot of friends in the industry that we would share when we had challenges. We'd talk to each other, call each other, email each other, and try to figure out, how did you fix this problem? And so there was a natural trust, I guess, if you would say it, based on the reputation that CFI and Conway had, that that they were doing things the right way for the most part, and what they're doing works. And so a lot of people would call and ask, how are you meeting these challenges? When the CARB regulations first started to appear, Conway was one of the very first fleets, and I think the first fleet to put skirts on their trailers. And the company that they partnered with, which was out of Canada, didn't have the capital to produce the skirts. So Conway funded the capital for that company, and in turn gained part ownership in that company with the capital that they invested. So it was just I don't know that it was a planned progression for me, but it was a good time in 11, 12, after that deep recession. And I was getting a lot of calls from people that were needing help specifically on their equipment side to truly understand total cost of ownership. And that's something that in the CFI days, we had a single model of a truck, trailer, tires, very much like what people would look at Southwest Airlines, buying one kind of plane from the same manufacturer, one kind of tire, and simplifying the complexity that can occur when you run more than one brand of truck or trailer, or more than one type of technology.
Yeah, you said something that I wanted to stop and pause on, and that is, how you talked about networking and getting to know people. I mean, when I think of you, Bruce, and our friendship, I think of, the old show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and you got to phone a friend, right? I mean, you are like the poster child of phone a friend. I mean, you when you have an issue or a problem, of course, today we all jump on YouTube and see if somebody else had that problem. But you augment that with just picking up the phone and calling somebody. And there's people who've had this problem before or been approached with this challenge before. And so, I think it's good advice even for anybody like listening to this, because, there's definitely people who've been through this stuff before. So get a wide net of your contacts or friends, and then use them, right? I mean, you do that all the time. I think it's important. You were an early adopter of really a package of fuel economy features: a 6x2 axle, direct drive AMT transmissions, wide base tires, down speeding, a low axle ratio, and all that put together at one time delivered a pretty good fuel economy savings. And for a while there was key, I would guess, for you. So can you walk us through that? I mean, that was pretty bold at the time, and it still is. But yeah, what did you learn from that as an early adopter, and what were some of the bumps in the road? Just take a few minutes and walk us through it.
Yeah, so one of the key things was an advantage we had with our systems was that we always had good data, and we practiced the fact that data needs to drive our decisions going forward. So when we would look at our fuel mileage data, and we would break that down like many fleets today break it down, or even the OEs break it down for us in their electronics on their trucks and their engines. We were looking at idle time, and we were looking at drive MPG, and time in top gear, and time amount in cruise control, long before most of the industry even understood what that meant. And the way it really started was to rank our drivers and say, why is Bill's MPG so much better than Joe's? And so we'd talk to drivers, and progressive shifting was one of the first things that a driver instructor, oddly enough from Caterpillar, that they used to make available to us, taught us, and we passed that on to drivers. But we also copied a lot of technology that others had tagged on to or been an early adopter of. And I still credit Royal Jones at Mesilla Valley down in Mexico and Texas as being one of the true early adopters of wide base tire technology and 6x2 configuration and direct drive. And he was large enough to make a difference, but small enough and involved in his daily business to really not be afraid to try things and really see what worked and what didn't work. In fact, he would try so many things at once that I'm not even sure Royal knew exactly how much each one of those technologies was making a difference, but it was all making a difference.
Fleets will be very regimented and do like one thing at a time. And this package grouped a lot of things together at one time. So when you're trying to execute that with driver training and shop and mechanic training and so forth, I mean, the car industry goes through model year changes, and the trucking industry has always been like, opposite of that. We just, we do one thing at a time. The truck OEMs release new features every month. Things are like really evergreen. Why did you package these together? And what's the benefits and challenges of like doing that? Just like putting stuff together. And it's got to be easier, I think, to adopt because you can focus around that. But I'm sure there's other challenges.
Yeah, so oddly enough, and we can talk about different technologies, but I'll give you an example on wide base tires. Michelin, that was their invention, and it's still a great product, but we didn't adopt that technology in 2002 because we were sure that it was going to make a big fuel mileage difference. We did it for a totally different reason. We had purchased some used trucks that were fairly low mileage, and they had a weight issue. And so we knew that if we converted those to wide base from dual, we would eliminate that weight difference and be able to operate that truck for about a year in our fleet until we could buy new trucks to replace them. But then what we learned after we had that technology in our fleet was we were able to prove pretty quickly that it was valid. And then the other factor that we really looked at, I would never have called CFI an early adopter or Conway. We were a fast follower. So we typically only picked technology that we knew someone else had already proven. And that's where those networking capabilities and friends in the industry came into play. When we could call them and get some information, but when we would, go out and see them and talk to them and credit them with the early adopter entrepreneur award, if you will.
Yeah.
We got a lot more information and saw how they used it, and there were some technologies that we considered that had been proven in other fleets, but they just didn't fit our fleet.
As we sit here in 2024, there's a lot of stuff on the horizon that looks really challenging, maybe more so than we were at our careers 20 or 30 years ago. We got electric trucks and hydrogen, we got infrastructure and fueling and technicians and electric. Everything seems to be either electronic or digital. Electricity's everywhere. Given, kind of how you've approached this, and I think engaging lots of different people from the drivers to the mechanics to other fleet managers in the industry, boy, how do you, maybe a big question, but what would be your advice to all of us trying to figure out the future when this looks like really different and challenging over the good old diesel engines and so forth that we've had for a long time?
Well, I think the thing that makes it the most challenging is that now that our options as fleet owners and buyers of trucks and trailers, our options are becoming less and less and more mandated by regulation. And thus the OEs are forced to add technology to trucks to meet their requirements. Just yesterday, I was talking to an OE supplier that we use a lot, and it's a major that everybody would recognize. And next year, starting in January, certain devices to improve aerodynamics are going to be required on every truck. Now, I could buy the truck, and if I don't believe in that piece of technology, I could take it off and put it back on when I sell the truck or sell those pieces. But I no longer have a choice now like I used to have. And some of those choices we have proven through our own testing didn't make enough of a difference to spec those items, but now we're limited and they're going to be on the truck whether we want them or not. So that's one challenge. The 2027 engine emission rules scares everybody, and rightfully so. And so I think in within the next, what do we got left? We got 5 months left of this year, and then 12 months next year, and then we're looking at January of 26, and which is a 27 model year. And unless something drastic changes in regulation, we're all going to be faced with some emission regulations that are going to result in additional equipment on the truck to learn how to maintain, what the dependability, what the reliability is. And so, not unlike our fleet now at Wilson, probably lots of other fleets are looking at, how do I get my fleet at a young age and possibly skip the early months or early year of 27 model year technology, so that I don't become the field test for the OEs. But I don't really blame the OEs. It's regulation that's pushing it.
Yeah.
The other topic I'd touch on is on electric. We have some dedicated customers now that are making it table stakes to say, in certain applications, and in our case, it has to do with yard hostlers or terminal tractors. In the bid that I'm working on right now, it's a table stake. You're either going to convert to electric terminal tractors, yard hostlers, over the next contract period, or you're out. You're no longer a provider for us. And so we've had to figure out how to make that work and how to have that return on investment. And fortunately, they're a good customer that is willing to look at an increased cost of initial upfront purchase or lease of that electric vehicle, but they know what kind of savings they're going to get on the back end of the diesel fuel that they're not going to have to purchase. So we're working together with customers now because they've made it table stakes.
Very interesting, and some great examples of how to start this navigating of a different different kind of truck, a different system. Whether we like it or not, if we're going to stick in trucking, and we got to figure out how to make it all work. Didn't really get into anything that I was worried about, so but we got into a lot of good meat. Thanks for being a friend, and thanks for being on the podcast. Appreciate it, Bruce.
All right, thanks for having me, and catch up with you soon. See ya.
Freight Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Rosen Friends.